She advances 100 yards ahead of her element, moving through canyon heat that bounces off fractured stone and narrows visibility under 100 yards. Dry wind pushes dust across her gloves as she steadies them on warm rock. The locator beacon from the downed Air Force crew pulses once, then fades again under static. Intermittent radio hiss cuts through the silence as she checks her stance and the weight of her gear. Signal integrity drops to an unstable margin. She is a Marine Staff Sergeant operating under U.S. authority, tasked to provide ground truth inside terrain where command sits miles away and visibility collapses without warning. Higher headquarters directs a hold until sensors confirm the threat picture, but she sees the western ridgeline shift as dust trails lift in thin arcs. Enemy fighters are maneuvering for position. Visibility falls under 100 yards. She understands the liability. Movement requires authorization from officers above her, but failure to report the real conditions on the ground puts survivors at risk. The rescue window tightens with every minute the beacon degrades. Rotor wash from a distant aircraft fades behind a bend, leaving only wind crossing the canyon floor. Command channel cuts out for 3 seconds. She plants her boots in drifting dust, watching heat distortion ripple above the canyon walls. She speaks the operational truth she can verify, calm and steady, even as the hold directive repeats. Downed crew. Minutes left. Fuel time for air support is slipping. Another faint pulse from the beacon nearly disappears into static. She braces for the next call from command, aware the situation is narrowing faster than the sensors admit. The rescue window is closing. She takes one controlled breath as the ridgeline dust thickens. This is where it starts. Canyon dust shifts in low wind as the Marine Staff Sergeant holds her position forward, 100 yards inside the corridor, reporting upward while command maintains control of movement authority. The locator signal flickers on her handheld display, its pulse dropping in and out, while faint rotor wash pushes against the stone from the aircraft holding several hundred yards away. Signal stability degrades without warning. A brief radio click rolls into silence as dust settles across a folded canyon map near her boots. Her gloved hand rests on the radio PTT, steady, waiting for the next directive while fuel time narrows overhead. Subscribe plus where you're watching from. This mission continues under tightening constraints. Subscribe now and state where you are listening from right now. The Marine Staff Sergeant stands inside a broken canyon corridor at 0230 hours, operating under U.S. authority as part of a joint recovery task force. She carries 30 pounds of gear, balanced and checked, and she moves with the disciplined cadence expected of a forward element responsible for securing an improvised extraction lane. Visibility stays under 50 yards. Heat rises off fractured stone in wavering sheets, and dry wind lifts sheared brush along the canyon floor. Gravel compresses under her boots as she adjusts her sling and confirms her position. Visibility drops under 50 yards, 2 miles forward. The downed aircraft rests beyond a series of narrow bends where GPS signals drift. Her handheld GPS, clipped to her vest, jumps several feet between reeds, unable to hold stable coordinates under the interference generated by the canyon walls. She notes the variance and logs it against her laminated card, secured with a small metal clip. Nearby, colored chem lights mark incremental distances, placed by Air Force recovery specialists who stage litters and medical kits beneath a thin shade canopy. Radio return is distorted again. The rescue aircraft orbits several miles out, holding at altitude as the fuel reserve narrows. Rotor thumps echo through the canyon, bouncing from rock to rock in irregular intervals. Ground crews shift gear under weight, tightening straps and confirming loadouts along the corridor. The staff sergeant listens, posture steady, as small stones click from the downdraft carried across the terrain. She reports her forward status through proper channels to officers positioned in a cooled operations tent, miles to the rear. Fuel window tightens on the aircraft overhead. She speaks calmly, confirming perimeter conditions and identifying the hazards that shape every step of the approach. The Air Force technical teams rely on her assessment to determine when the corridor is stable enough to authorize movement. Only higher headquarters can approve that shift, and only when they are satisfied that the ground truth supports safe recovery. Her role is to ensure that nothing compromises that information stream. Radio interference increases across secondary channel. She surveys the canyon walls. Heat shimmer distorts outlines at mid-range, creating brief flickers in depth perception. Brush, caught, between stone shelves rolls under the soft push of wind. Dust settles across her folded map, secured at her side by a corner hook. The chem light markers glow in muted colors as the early light pushes down into the corridor. Each marker identifies a safe lane, tested under current terrain pressure. Improvised recovery corridor. Terrain denied. Air Force recovery specialists continue their checks. They test harnesses, confirm medical loadouts, and run quick diagnostics on communications gear. A pararescue non-commissioned officer kneels beside a litter frame, ensuring locking pins seat correctly. The staff sergeant watches the process but does not interfere. Interbranch coordination requires clarity in roles, and her responsibility is the ground corridor, not their internal procedures. Signal drift increases beyond normal variance. She cycles her radio, receiving fragmented returns from the operations tent. Commands arrive blurred by canyon reflections, each call echoing twice before fading. She repeats confirmations in steady cadence, preventing crosstalk and ensuring accountability for every transmitted update. Her Marines form a controlled perimeter behind her, 50 yards spread along the stone shelves, scanning both ridgelines and the narrow funnel ahead. Temperature rise increases distortion at mid-range. Her laminated card contains handwritten notes logged since first contact with the aftermath of the crash, coordinates, visibility ranges, drift intervals, and sound observations are all recorded. She checks them with practiced calm, verifying what has changed and what still holds. Nothing in her tone suggests stress, but each update reflects urgency shaped by procedure rather than emotion. Secondary comms spike with static. The canyon tightens around the next bend, and she evaluates its choke point potential. If recovery forces advance without confirmation, they risk compression under unseen movement along upper shelves. If they delay, the locator beacon from the downed crew continues to degrade, narrowing the window for survival. Her responsibility is to provide accurate ground conditions so higher headquarters can authorize the safest viable option. Rotor echo deepens against the stone. She notes her Marines' spacing. Their gear shifts under weight, each movement deliberate to avoid noise bursts that might mask distant signatures. Air Force personnel adjust litters, tighten straps, and reseat equipment in preparation for controlled movement. All teams operate under shared understanding. The environment dictates the risk, and procedural accuracy reduces it. Channel clarity drops below acceptable threshold. She scans the distant ridge. Fine dust moves in irregular patterns, though no confirmed threat is visible. Still, the distortion in radio return and the narrowing fuel clock indicate that command assumptions may not fully account for the conditions on the ground. She logs the inconsistency without speculation, following the discipline expected of her rank. Heat shimmer increases along the forward route. Command continues to monitor the corridor from their operations tent miles away. Their sensors show a stable picture, but the staff sergeant stands inside the terrain itself, where interference, shifting visibility, and the narrowing extraction window signal a different operational truth. She remains calm, waiting for the next directive, knowing that authorization to move depends on headquarters reconciling what they see with what she reports. Forward comms resilience decreases. She rechecks her gear. She steadies the handheld GPS, verifies the next chem light distance at 50 yards, and confirms the location of her Marines. The canyon remains quiet, but its conditions shift every minute. She records each shift as part of her obligation to the chain of command. Radio delay increases by several seconds. Everything remains procedurally sound, but one vulnerability becomes clear. Headquarters maintains confidence in sensor data that does not reflect the real-time degradation she observes at ground level. That discrepancy marks the first fracture point forming in the mission timeline, and it is where the next failure will emerge. The Marine Staff Sergeant holds her position inside the canyon at 0830 hours, operating under U.S. authority with her Marines spread along narrow shelves behind her. The air shimmers in oppressive heat, distorting depth at mid-range and tightening visibility closer to 100 yards. Static grinds across her radio as she listens for the locator beacon, now barely audible. Air Force pararescue specialists work under a shade net nearby, their medical kits open, straps lifting in the wind as grit drifts across fabric. The crash site remains 2 miles ahead through broken stone, collapsed shelves, and choke points that tolerate no error. Beacon strength drops again. Headquarters labels the area unverified and orders her element to hold until overhead sensors establish a clean threat picture. She acknowledges the directive and maintains her posture. Her Marines watch the western ridge where dust plumes rise in irregular bursts, formed by maneuvering fighters moving beyond the angles available to overhead surveillance. She tracks each plume without speculation, noting only what she can confirm from ground level. She carries 50 pounds of gear, checked and secured, and the laminated route card clipped to her vest gathers a layer of dust as the wind cuts along the canyon floor. Visibility falls under 100 yards. She reports conditions to officers positioned miles away in a cooled operations tent. Each update travels through radio interference that worsens with each call. She repeats coordinates and beacon degradation to ensure her transmissions remain admissible and clear. The pararescue team inspects harnesses and staging equipment, preparing for rapid extraction once higher headquarters authorizes movement. Their aircraft orbits several miles out, fuel reserves narrowing as rotor wash pulses faintly across distant stone. Command channel returns with distortion. She rechecks her Marine's spacing. Boot soles grind into unstable footing where rock shelves have partially collapsed from heat expansion. Gravel shifts in small cascades beneath them. Her forward element remains steady, disciplined, and silent. The staff sergeant remains calm, focused entirely on procedural requirements and the responsibility to provide accurate ground truth. She does not deviate from protocol even as conditions narrow around her. Rifle rounds echo faintly through the canyon. The locator beacon flickers again on her handheld device, the signal broken by interference. Air Force pararescue specialists glance toward her for confirmation. She raises a hand to indicate no authorization to move. Command's hesitance becomes an operational factor in itself, as every minute strains the viability of recovery. Heat shimmer blurs the western ridge, making enemy movement harder to track. Rescue aircraft reports 10 minutes to bingo fuel. She logs every condition on the dust-covered route card, visibility estimates, signal fluctuations, dust movement patterns, and comms integrity. Her handwriting remains controlled despite the heat. She notes that overhead systems still report limited threat indicators, even though dust plumes form consistent signatures of maneuver on the ridge. She does not interpret. She records observable fact and transmits only what she can verify. Her Marines tighten their grips on their rifles as unstable rock shelves creak under thermal stress. Interference spike on primary channel. She hears the muffled echo of another distant round bouncing from wall to wall. It may be probing fire or unrelated activity, but it increases uncertainty for the route ahead. The pararescue team closes medical kits halfway, preparing to move at a moment's notice while staying within the hold order. Wind pushes grit across the tarp beneath their equipment. The staff sergeant stands forward by 20 yards, absorbing every detail of the terrain's behavior. Beacon return degrades below prior baseline. The sun angles deeper into the canyon, compressing shadowed areas where fighters on the ridge could maneuver unseen. Dust lifts in small spirals under shifting airflow. She monitors these changes with the same calm expected of her rank. Gear shifts under her vest as she lifts her radio again, transmitting another update to headquarters. Her report remains steady. Beacon degradation, narrowing visibility, enemy dust movement, sensor gaps, and unstable terrain conditions. Visibility contracts again. Headquarters repeats its hold directive, citing insufficient verification from overhead platforms. She acknowledges the call and continues logging. Her Marines exchange minimal signals, maintaining spacing across uneven ground. The pararescue specialists reposition their shade net as wind begins to rise through the corridor. The aircraft overhead announces an additional reduction in fuel time, forcing a potential retreat to a refuel point 3 miles away if authorization does not come soon. Fuel reserve shortens further. The staff sergeant checks the canyon choke point ahead. The collapsed shelf narrows passage to only a few yards, creating a natural funnel that would slow any ground movement and expose her Marines to fire from the western ridge. She records the risk factor as part of her procedural assessment. The locator beacon pulses weakly, nearly falling below detection. She notes its weakening pattern in precise intervals. Secondary comms route degrades. She hears another faint echo of rifle fire. The ridgeline dust plumes grow more defined, indicating maneuvering fighters drawing closer to the crash site. She watches heat shimmer ripple across the stone as the canyon amplifies temperature and distorts distance. Her Marines shift slightly, rebalancing their footing on fractured ground. The pararescue team tests their harness line, confirming load distribution before any potential movement. Beacon strength dips to intermittent pulses. The staff sergeant continues transmitting updates to officers at the operations tent. Their responses remain cautious, shaped by incomplete sensor returns that fail to match her ground observations. She keeps her voice steady, presenting clear facts rather than urgency. Her role is not to pressure headquarters, but to document conditions accurately so they can authorize lawful movement. Command delay extends beyond forecasted interval. Dust plumes rise again along the western ridge, sharper this time, more defined under the afternoon glare. She logs the pattern, notes the directionality, and checks visibility once more. It remains unstable, compressing and expanding between 80 and 100 yards. The aircraft overhead calls another update, reporting that if movement does not begin, they will soon reposition to conserve fuel. Rotor wash drifts across distant stone. She feels the canyon tightening not through emotion but through the measurable contraction of operational variables. Beacon degradation, fuel reduction, enemy proximity, and command delay. Each factor compounds into the next. Her Marines maintain discipline behind her. The pararescue specialists secure the last of their gear under the shade net, prepared but unable to advance. Signal clarity drops below operational threshold. Every detail of the environment reflects compression. Heat increases, shadows deepen, radio static grows louder. The staff sergeant considers the choke point ahead, its narrow structure and unstable shelf, and records its risk classification for headquarters. The crash site's survival window narrows, though she states this only as documented fact, not as emotional appeal. Situational margin contracts further. She listens for new directives. None come. She checks the locator beacon. The signal barely returns. Enemy dust rises again. The aircraft overhead remains at risk of fuel cutoff. She records these elements in sequence, understanding their combined effect. The mission cannot hold in this configuration much longer. The last stable second arrives as she notes the next fluctuation in beacon return. Operational tolerance reaches its limit. She moves upslope at 0940 hours, climbing the jagged spur that rises above the canyon floor. The incline forces her to shift 30 pounds of gear across her shoulders for balance. Stone flakes away under her boots as she distributes weight along narrow holds. Heat shimmer rises from the canyon walls, bending light and compressing depth. Her breathing stays controlled in the mic, steady and unbroken, as she ascends toward the notch that offers the only reliable vantage along this corridor. Enemy movement increases along the lower flank. She reaches the first ledge, tests its stability, and continues upward. Wind presses against her position, pushing dust across her gloves as she steadies herself. She keeps the laminated coordinate card clipped to her vest within reach. 600 yards below, the bright canyon floor reveals partial silhouettes shifting in the distorted glare, figures maneuvering in a pattern consistent with a flanking approach around the downed crew. The aircraft remains 1 mile out, holding its orbit as fuel time contracts. Command channel returns with delay. She reaches the narrow notch and braces herself against warm stone. From this elevation, visibility widens beyond what overhead sensors have shown. She raises her camera, aligns the frame, and confirms the silhouettes along the concealed flank. Heat distortion complicates edges, but their movement remains consistent and coordinated. She records multiple images, ensuring each frame captures orientation, spacing, and direction of travel. Dust settles across her gloves as she reviews the display for clarity. Rescue aircraft reports fuel under 15 minutes. She marks coordinates on her grease-penciled card, writing each value in measured strokes. She timestamps her notes, ensuring documentation aligns with command protocol. Her voice remains steady as she transmits a concise report to officers in the operations tent positioned miles away. She does not interpret intent. She documents observable fact. Enemy fighters closing toward the crash site, outdated imagery no longer reflecting conditions, and the narrowing window for lawful recovery. Signal clarity improves from elevation. She sends the first set of photographs upstream, describing angles, distances, and time of capture. The wind pushes fabric against stone as she shifts position to capture a second sequence. Her breathing stays even. The canyon below brightens briefly as sunlight hits exposed rock. That light reveals 2 surviving crew members at the wreckage, still moving, still attempting to signal, still exposed to the tightening maneuver closing from the west. Enemy proximity increases on the upper ridge. She compiles her notes, silhouettes along the flank, rate of movement, estimated distance from survivors, and the mismatch between real-time ground truth and the risk assessment headquarters has been using. She transmits the second update, ensuring each line is admissible under standard reporting procedures. She requests updated authorization for movement based on new information, citing precise coordinates and timestamps to support the recommendation. Command channel stabilizes with minor distortion. Her Marines remain positioned below, maintaining security and waiting for lawful clearance. The pararescue specialists stand ready at the choke point, prepared to move as soon as authorization comes through. She updates them briefly, noting that evidence has been transmitted and command review is underway. The wind rises again, carrying dust into the notch. She keeps her footing steady, letting the gust pass before adjusting her stance. Updated ground truth overrides HQ feed. She photographs the flank again, capturing the moment enemy silhouettes shift in elevation. The ridgeline shows narrowing distance between the maneuver and the crash site. She documents these changes with the same procedural tone she applies to all reporting. The canyon echoes a faint weapon report, bouncing between ridges as she logs time and direction. Nothing in her posture changes. She remains focused on what can be confirmed and transmitted. Sensor discrepancy, confirmed by visual evidence. She receives acknowledgement from headquarters. Officers confirm receipt of images and note the inconsistency between current ground truth and the outdated feed. She continues providing detail, estimated time until contact between enemy fighters and survivors, projected intercept routes, and recommended movement corridor for recovery. Her breathing remains steady in the mic, unaffected by exertion or heat. Fuel window reaches critical threshold. Command begins revising posture. She provides an additional angle from the notch, capturing the bright canyon floor and the exposed wreckage. The surviving crew remain visible, crouched low under fractured metal. She logs their approximate distance from the flanking maneuver, under 400 yards now, and transmits that data without emphasis. Her role is documentation. The weight of decision sits with headquarters. Enemy rotation accelerates toward crash site. She stabilizes her camera against a stone outcrop to capture one more frame with reduced motion. The wind buffets her shoulder, fabric scraping against rough rock. She confirms clarity on the display, adds a timestamp, and sends the final set of images. The updated threat picture becomes undeniable. The corridor is not cold, and the survivors are at immediate risk. Command acknowledges real-time correction. She hears the shift in tone over the channel, officers recalculating, revising assumptions, and preparing to issue updated directives. She states once more the precise distances, the observed movement rate, and the narrowing margin for extraction. Headquarters replies with confirmation that movement authorization is under review based on her evidence. She continues holding her position, monitoring enemy silhouettes through the glare. Interference drops to minimal levels. Her Marines remain disciplined below. Air Force specialists stay staged and ready. She keeps visual contact with both the survivors and the enemy maneuver. She adds an additional note for headquarters. Terrain along the flanking route offers limited concealment, enabling recovery if authorization is immediate. Immediate threat verified through elevation. Headquarters issues the updated authorization. Movement is now permitted, based solely on the documented evidence she provided. The accountability trigger pulls into place: time-stamped images, corrected coordinates, verified ground truth, and a formal adjustment to operational posture. She acknowledges receipt and prepares to descend from the notch. Command posture shifts to match real conditions. The rescue aircraft begins its descent at 0950 hours, its soft rotor wash folding brush along the canyon floor. Dust lifts in low spirals as shifting winds push grit against stone. She moves with controlled steps, her gear settling against her frame as she clears the path for the recovery element. Visibility remains restricted under 50 yards, and every motion stays deliberate. Rotor wash pushes debris across the funnel. In her glove, a time-stamped evidence photo shows the flanking maneuver that headquarters could not see. She keeps it secured until it can be logged. The notebook clipped to her vest flips open in the wind, a page lifting and settling again, ink smudged from sweat, but entries still readable. She maintains procedural focus, confirming that each detail will stand under review. Command confirms extraction window. She is a Marine Staff Sergeant operating within U.S. authority, and nothing in her conduct departs from that structure. Her transmission of evidence followed protocol. Her request for authorization moved through the proper channels. She escalated only what she could verify, documenting each step so leadership could assume responsibility for the next decision. There is no defiance in her posture, only duty carried out with precision. Visibility remains under 50 yards. Air Force specialists advance behind her, relying on the corridor she holds open. The descending aircraft pushes a subdued bass-like thrum across the stone as it lowers toward the survivors. She keeps her stance steady, acknowledging command's updated directives and aligning movement with the authorized plan. Nothing she does is for credit. Everything she does is to ensure that decisions are supported by facts. Duty is accountability. Another pulse of rotor wash sweeps through the brush, and she signals the team forward. Her ethic remains constant: provide the truth, follow the rules, protect the people entrusted to her. In this mission, clarity is the difference between loss and recovery, and she treats that clarity as a responsibility rather than an achievement. She moves toward the extraction point with the same steady discipline, carrying the weight of the record forward. Canyon wind rises as the recovery team advances at 0950 hours. pushing dust across equipment and carrying the pulse of rotor wash deeper into the corridor. The locator beacon blinks at the edge of failure, each flash slower than the last. The winch line from the rescue aircraft lowers 100 yards ahead, swaying under shifting gusts. Radio double clicks return with minor distortion as updates pass between teams. Beacon strength drops again. Headquarters maintains authority over movement and timing, but she holds responsibility for ground truth. Earlier hesitation compressed the rescue window. Any further delay risks losing the crew before extraction is complete. The comparison between outdated imagery and her documented evidence forms the central tension. Wait for distant certainty, or move within the rules to secure accurate situational awareness. Which call would you make? Both choices carry operational cost. Freezing preserves strict adherence to remote caution. Advancing within protocol provides the facts that determine survivability. Now choose one of those two actions and state your decision in the comments. The rescue aircraft lifts away as canyon shadows lengthen, its rotor wash pushing dust across the landing zone before fading toward the ridge. Crews secure the recovered personnel, checking restraints and confirming status while gear settles under its own weight. Wind moves along the stone corridor, carrying the final radio click as channels return to standby. Rotor wash tapers off across the ridge. The operation concludes under U.S. authority with each decision documented and logged. The recovery element begins its withdrawal, leaving the corridor clear and returning responsibility to the broader task force. A body cam frame of the recovered crew marks the final entry in this incident sequence. Dust drifts across the empty touchdown point as the last element steps off the zone. Next mission loading. If you value accountable, ground truth reporting of real operations, like this, brief and subscribe. The next mission is already queued and moves the record forward.